the problem with the conversation about environmentalism in this country and abroad. And I use the word environmentalism, not climate change or global warming. Environmentalism is just a political movement based upon some scientific trends that should be addressed. Considering if we want to be able to continue with this habit we have as a species of passing our civilization forward to further generations. Using terms like global warming and climate change and the way that those terms are used has turned it into a apocalyptic, almost religious event, shifting environmentalism into some sort of almost techno-Gaianism, pseudo-spirituality, mingled with elements of the New Age movement and feminism and a couple other little grab bag of what used to be more obscure hard left, sub-factions. Have all kind of been bundled together now. Even environmentalism itself has been bundled together into this larger umbrella. And it's been corrupted. It's been captured by corporate politics. And I don't trust it. If we really wanted to save the world, in terms of like environmental damage and wanting to like reverse, somewhat the amount of carbon we've dumped into the atmosphere, it's not through recycling plastic. It's through abandoning the use of plastic entirely. It's not by switching to windmills and hydroelectric and nuclear in, favor over using coal-fired electric grids. It's unplugging ourselves down to just minimal electric use, if even that. Let us not forget that all these troubles began when we started trying to wire the entire world together. I can imagine a political cartoon. I wish I had that kind of drawing skill to do, your classic newspaper, New Yorker political cartoon kind of style thing. But I can picture it in my head, where, it's you got a scientist or an engineer, maybe kind of a combination of like a scientist and like a monopoly man business guy. Standing next to the Earth, it's just kind of floating over there. And it's covered in like all these buildings and machinery and chugging factory smokestacks, and there's all this smog and dirt and filth around it. And he's showing it off to some other guy, and he's like, isn't this fantastic? Look at like how efficient this is, making everything, and look at the productivity. These people aren't just sitting around scratching their ass, eating bananas off the ground like they did originally. No, and like now they're building buildings and roads, and they're getting shit done. They're making mad stacks of cash and getting all the pussy. And then the guy's like, okay, that's pretty cool and all. It's kind of dirty, is there anything we can do about that? I'm noticing it's making, some of them sick and all that. And the dude's like, well, don't worry about that. If it keeps running, eventually it's going to clean itself up. It's like, yeah, but should we just unplug it? No, that would make things worse. We need to just keep letting it go. And eventually, entirely on its own, it's just going to magically just turn green and stop doing all this stuff. That's horse shit. If we really wanted to, quote-unquote, save the world, we would just go back to humanity's natural setting. We'd be like a horticulturalist / slightly agrarian society, spread relatively evenly out across the landscape without these big megacities. We wouldn't really have capitalism or communism. There'd be a little bit of money, but, only like the feudal lords who are, kind of making sure everyone stays organized and on task. We are going to have any real, need for, trade exchange on that kind of level where you need money because of abstract stuff. On the small level, people are mostly just kind of be subsistence farmers, trading with their neighbors and, giving over a chunk of their crops as they're able to the people at the top, who will then, trade for things from other lands and distribute the bounty of what they gain down to the little people. Sounds horrible, doesn't it? But, that's what we're supposed to be living like. And, without cars and concrete roads and electric power and all the requirements of electric power, like the majority of the environmental damage that we're doing would be halted. We would still like have a massive handprint on the environment, though. Since we've discovered agriculture and started farming, we've started to change the environment on the small scale. Each and every individual farm is re-landscaped and adapted for farming. And when you keep putting farm next to farm, next to farm, next to farm, until eventually it stretches across an entire continent, well, you've just changed the environment for that entire continent now, haven't you? All without having to dump extra petrocarbons into the atmosphere. Now, admittedly, I am mistrustful of the weather prediction aspects of some of the science. We can barely trust what our weather apps tell us is going to happen later on today. So our ability to say what's going to happen 100 to 200 years from now is both abstract and quite likely wrong. Just the predictions that I recall hearing when as a child in the 1980s about where things are supposed to be right now, they haven't quite come to pass. That being said, our sensor equipment is not just making shit up. We can record the materials that we're putting into the atmosphere. And to what degree that might cause things to warm or cool kind of doesn't matter. This planet's environment in that fashion has been all over the place throughout its very long and human-free history. In fact, you can almost argue that the planet's biodiversity was at its greatest during those periods where it had no ice caps and maximized amounts of shallow water oceans. Now, under those circumstances, and considering that this is a slow process that's not going to happen overnight like some Roland Emmerich movie, the people who are the most affected by, rising coastlines and stuff like that are people who own property in cities and other areas along those coastlines. Everyone else is going to have more than enough ample time to move if need be. The real problem with all this stuff that we're putting in the atmosphere, beyond the fact that it can give us cancer and just other host of other little problems, just on the surface level, no matter what your belief system is, poisoning the air and the water, why you don't need it to be anything more than that to sell people on not doing that. You don't want to breathe or drink poison. Duh. One would think, of course, also, we are a species that likes to drink alcohol, which is a toxin, so, maybe we do like to be poisoned. Who knows? We certainly like all of our comforts and tricks and gizmos. We like having entertainment on tap. We like our communications devices. We like being able to listen to music. We like being able to have light at night. We like having air conditioning in the summer, and we like having heat in the winter. To some degree, if we were to suddenly unplug everything and shove everyone back out into the wilderness with this many human beings on the planet, how fast would we decimate all of our forests? Within a couple of years, I would imagine, just for the drive to get firewood so that everyone can not freeze to death night by night. And those large portions of the planet that do get a wee bit nipply in the evening during half the year. There's lots of impracticalities, to some degree, there's this thing, comedians like Doug Stanhope and others, make jokes about how the world would be better off with less human beings and all that kind of stuff. Which, may or may not be true. We don't actually know what the maximum capacity is because we don't have anything to compare it with. But, you'd end up making yourself the worst villain of all history in order to be able to actually do anything about that. That's not, completely inhumane. No, the problem really is just the fact that every time in history there's been a large spike in carbon particles in the atmosphere, often caused by outgassing from large amounts of volcanic activity that have erupted from occasional time to time, is that often, right afterwards, the oceans get all acidic and you have a massive die-off that creates this whole big, great chain event through the whole chain of life. Doesn't kill everything, but it kills a lot. So, whether or not we can get through the rest of our lives relatively unmolested, whether or not our children and grandchildren can get through the rest of their lives relatively unmolested by climate change. Do on some level, are we comfortable with, all as a generation, most of us dying, kind of wondering whether or not we've murdered the planet 1,000 years from now by our decisions today? But no one proposes the hard things that would need to be done to actually do anything to save it. The companies aren't telling us to, don't unplug your television and stop buying stuff. You need to keep your television on. You need to pay your power bills. We want everyone living in the city so that we can milk as much money out of them as possible. We want, using money as kind of like this whole carrot stick thing to keep people on this hamster wheel so we can build infrastructure. Just got to keep building infrastructure. It's what we need. We got to get more concrete. Don't you know we're almost out of sand because we've made so much fucking concrete? We need more. Find something to pulverize so we can make more concrete. No, we're not actually serious. No one's saying just unplug everything. They're continuing just kicking the can down the road. Get rid of gasoline. Okay. You're not saying get rid of cars, I notice. In fact, you're trying to encourage us to buy even more expensive cars that require giant batteries, that require just as much rare earth metals, that arguably do more damage. It's one thing to poke a hole in the ground and siphon up some liquid that's way down deep under there, but strip mining, oh, that's a glorious thing. There are whole segments of West Virginia that used to be tall, high mountains, and they've been pulled down until they're nothing but big, steaming, blackened, toxic pits, all for the sake of powering our PlayStations and our lawnmowers and our oscillating fans and all these other little things that are great and make our lives so comfortable and poke this weird dopamine hit thing that's going on in our brain about all sorts of little things. It makes things so comfortable, and it makes us feel like we're all fancy and superior to every generation of human beings that's ever walked this planet. Those primitive bastards. Primitive, pre-civilized humanity was not primitive. There's no such thing. We've never found wild human beings that had no clothes, no tools, and couldn't speak. We're all civilized. What we call primitive are just the human beings that were still living naturally. Stay waspinated.